Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Future Bites, a conversation with Stephen Wilson. I'm here with Stephen, as you can see, and we're going to talk about the new album, The Future Bites. So this is really exciting. Album is out next year in January. Only about 3 months away, though, now, as we're coming to the end of this year. So, Stephen, I just wanted to ask you, first of all, because you always say that with every album you try and do something very, very different, and The Future Bites is no exception. So when you started crafting this album, what aspects of your musical palette did you want to draw from the most?
That's a very good question, and I'm sure it's a question I'm going to be asked a lot over the next few months when
Yeah.
I'm about the album in interviews, and I haven't actually got to that stage yet. So forgive me if I struggle to articulate some of this stuff. Even some of this stuff I haven't quite got straight in my own mind yet. So this would be very interesting for me to go through this exercise. So I think the answer to your question, I think two main things for me. Firstly, I think I became much more conscious of the fact that the last few records I'd done had all in their own way been homages to the past.
Yeah.
So, and not in a bad way, in fact, in a very sort of loving way, a very warm, loving way. But I made a couple of records that were very much, in the style of 70s conceptual rock music. And then I made the last album, To the Bone, which was more kind of love letter to experimental pop music of the 80s.
Yeah.
And I think I came to the conclusion that what I wanted to do with this next record, at the time, what was going to be the next record, was a record that could only exist now.
Mm-hmm.
So it could only really draw, that sounded like it was only really drawing on the music of now. And that's not to say that, not just contemporary pop music, because a lot of music is very timeless. We still hear a lot of different kinds of music all around us all the time. Mm-hmm. Which sounds very much of the now, but obviously has, roots going back decades. So the bottom line is I wanted to make a record which didn't sound like an homage to some kind of past era. And in doing that, I think the other main differentiating factor of this record kind of came along naturally as a consequence of that, which is I ended up using a lot less of the traditional vocabulary of rock music, shall we say.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that's not to say this record is an electronic record, it isn't. Mm-hmm. But there's more, I guess it's more of an electronic sensibility. I don't really know how else to explain it, but if you listen to a song like Eminent Sleaze, for example, there's no synthesizers on that at all. Yeah. It's like percussion, hand claps, bass guitar, but there's something about it that has a very electronic sensibility. Mm-hmm. I think that makes sense to you. So although the musical palette is very organic, the kind of musical vocabulary is much less what you might call classic rock, and much more kind of contemporary electronic pop or rock. I don't know how to really articulate that, but it still sounds obviously very much like my record. Yeah,
and it has this kind of classic sort of vintage feel, amongst all this sort of like new electronic approach that you've got, which is, I just think it's a really exciting sound. So, just about the production, because this is obviously something that you obviously always hold in high regard as something that you put an enormous amount of effort into every time that you come to making a record. This album is again just sort of meticulous in its approach to sonics. Personally, I think it's probably got the punchiest mix of all your albums so far. I mean, it just blasts out the speakers. So you worked on this album with David Costin. It's the first time you've made a record with him. So what strengths was he able to sort of bring to the table with this album?
So I think, it's interesting. I think you're right. Sonically, this is probably the best sounding record I've ever made, and there's no coincidence that I didn't mix it. I have a certain way of mixing, which again I think has its roots in what I grew up listening to. Mm-hmm. So a lot of 70s and 80s music, and again I wanted this record to sound much more contemporary, much more punchy. Mm-hmm. And I went to David because David for me is like the perfect foil, because he's roughly the same age as me. We grew up with the same kind of music, but he was never really particularly into the classic rock stuff that I grew up with. He grew up with listening to much more electronic music,
Hmm.
and but still has a love of great songwriting and the craft of songwriting, and he's very focused on that. And I was very much a fan of some of the records that he produced for people like Everything Everything,
Hmm.
particularly if you know that band.
Yeah.
Um, very, very sophisticated, complex, intelligent pop music, but
Mm.
with a fantastic kind of sheen to the production.
Yeah.
Similarly, what he did with Bats for Lashes,
Hmm.
the record he made last year with Keane, whatever you think of Keane, it just sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
And he finished that record just before he worked with me on my record. And he's very much got his finger on the pulse in terms of the modern sound of sophisticated, intelligent pop, for want of a better word, records. And
Hmm.
I use this word pop advisedly. I know some people sort of recoil at the word pop music,
Yeah.
but for me, pop music is the Beatles. It's the
Yeah.
Beatles. That's the tradition of pop, and everything else
Yeah.
has come ever since. So I'm using pop in the broadest sense. Um,
Yeah, I think a lot of people just hear the word pop and they just think all the music that's in the charts. Whereas it's kind of a genre in its own right, in the sense that you've got that can. It's very, very possible. It's completely possible to make intelligent pop music, and that's kind of what I think you've been trying to crack with these last couple of records that you've been doing. To the bone there. That's kind of where it all started for you. But I guess in the sense you've kind of always had this sort of pop sensibility to your music throughout your career. I mean,
yeah, I mean,
so
the first. Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, Rob.
that's right.
The first the first sort of project that I managed to make a living from, actually got a foothold in the music industry with, which was of course No Man. When we signed the record deals in '92, that was what enabled me to become a professional musician. And
Yeah.
No Man at the time were completely committed to making some kind of form of contemporary romantic pop music. We were using breakbeats, a lot of electronic music, and Porcupine Tree, which started around the same time, kind of was a side project, which was
Yeah.
more concerned with being more nostalgic.
Yeah.
I think people sometimes forget that because Porcupine Tree was the project that took off for me, and became the shop window, if you like, for what I could do. People sometimes think of me as someone that makes classic rock music, but
Yeah.
actually and I do, but that's only a part of what I love to do.
Yeah.
Even on an album like Hand Cannot Erase, which is very much a conceptual rock record, there's a track like Perfect Life, which is pure
Yeah.
electronic music.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's, for me, it's got more in common with Boards of Canada than it has with Pink Floyd. But I mean, again, this whole pop thing. I mean, I grew up buying Pink Floyd records that had "File Under Popular" written on.
Yeah.
So to me, that was also pop music. Pink Floyd is pop music.
Yeah.
Popular music which is about the art of songwriting and the art of crafting melodies and those kind of things. That's popular music. So anyway, to go back to the idea, to the story of David. So David kind of kept me, if you like, focused on this idea of making a very contemporary sounding record, which was the priority was always the melodies, the catchiness, the hookiness of the songs. And I'm very good at disappearing down blind. If I'm left to my own device, very good at disappearing down blind alleys. And cracks sometimes of the basic thing that really gets to people, at the gut level and appeals to people at the gut level, which is melodies and harmonies and things that they want to hear again and again and get in your head. And there's no shame in aspiring to that. Again, as I say, that's what the Beatles.
I mean, you could argue that it's harder to write a song that gets stuck in people's heads than it is to write a 25-minute long, progressive rock piece. Because
it's really hard.
Yeah. There's definitely an art to that, to writing something that can just be ingrained in someone's head. And so. The Future Bites is going to be one of the first albums ever to be released in Dolby Atmos. So this is obviously very, very new and very exciting. So how did you sort of come to the conclusion that you were going to do the album in Atmos, and how did that come about?
Yeah, it's a long story in a way. I'll try and keep it short, short as I can anyway. So basically, as you know, and I'm sure a lot of people out there know, that I've built up a sort of reputation for myself as someone who does 5.1 mixing. So surround sound. So just for the people who don't know, that's basically two speakers in front of you, two speakers behind you, a speaker in the center, and a subwoofer, which is the 0.1, which is the low end frequencies, which is something everyone's kind of heard when they've been to a cinema. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people now increasingly are putting together their own systems at home to listen to 5.1 audio. Mm-hmm. And I kind of got involved with 5.1 audio at a time when it was kind of at rock bottom, you know. Yeah. The big labels had kind of all tried to promote it in the early 21st century, and it hadn't really caught on commercially. Mm-hmm. So there were a lot of people doing it. So it was a great opportunity for me to start getting into an area where there was a gap in the market, if you like. And so, to cut a long story short, I built a reputation over the last 10 years or so for doing 5.1 mixes, and some people seem to like the way I do them. I do them in a very kind of instinctive way. I never listen to what other people did, really, and I just kind of approached it in a kind of idiot savant way. You know, this sounds good to me, and people seem to like it. So I got a reputation for being quite good at doing 5.1 mixes. And then increasingly over the last 2 or 3 years, people kept asking me, and I'm talking about the major record labels here that were approaching me to do classic, you know, projects, archive projects. Can you do an Atmos mix? And I'm like, well, what's that? Yeah, what's that? So I thought, well, I better find out, you know. So I found out a little bit more about it. And what it boils down to is Dolby Atmos is most commonly it's 7.1.4, which means that instead of the 5 speakers around you, you have 7 speakers around you in the horizontal plane, 2 extra speakers either side of you. So the 2 front, 2 back, and now you have 2 in the side. You still have the 0.1, which is the low frequency, but now you have the 0.4. What's that? I hear you ask. That's 4 speakers above you. So 2 at the front, 2 at the back, but elevated. So what you have now is you have a horizontal plane, but you also have a vertical plane that you can move audio into. And needless to say, it's the kind of next step on in terms of creating a very immersive kind of sound experience. I totally fell in love with it. And the first time I heard it was when I went down to I was lucky enough to be invited down to Abbey Road to hear the Atmos playback of Abbey Road, which Giles Martin had remixed into Atmos, and I was blown away. I mean, this is just the natural next step on in terms of immersive sound. So at that point, I got chatting with the guys from Dolby were at that playback. I got chatting with the main head honcho at Dolby there, and I told him about myself, and he knew of some of my work in 5.1. And I said, well, I'd love to get involved in this. So they very kindly let me go down to their studio in Soho in London and basically work with one of their engineers on creating the Atmos mix for the Future Bites. And we had a lot of fun. We played some nuggets with it. And my philosophy was the 5.1 is there. We're going to do the 5.1 anyway, and that's going to be on the disc. And that's kind of my usual approach. So let's have fun with the Atmos mix. Let's actually have a lot more things moving around and make it a little bit more gimmicky in a way, I suppose. But you know, I figure that if you want the more conservative approach, that's the 5.1. It's still pretty wacky, having said that. But the Atmos mix is really something else. And just to finish the story, since then, I've put my own Atmos system together at home, and I'm now remixing everything I've ever done into Atmos, whether people want it or not. They're going to have the option.
Well, this is the thing about Atmos, right? Is that you can obviously have the crazy high end, you know, like system like the one that you've got, but you can get like, you know, sort of speakers now that are just small little speakers that support Atmos as well. So, you know, you don't have to fork out a fortune to get one of these things and to hear the album in that format. So it's a really cool thing.
Yes, and that was one of the things that really appealed to me about Atmos is that you don't even need to have an Atmos system. There are sound bars, as I understand it, that will decode Atmos. I don't know how it works, but I also, when I was down at Dolby, they put a pair of headphones on me and they said, listen to this. And it was an Atmos mix coming at me, my own Atmos mix coming at me in headphones. And I wouldn't say it was completely 100% discrete, but it was 80% of the effect. Was right there in stereo, in a pair of stereo headphones. So I'm like, okay, this has got in some ways, this has got a much better chance of catching on than 5.1 ever did. Yeah, because if you want a 5.1, you got to, you know, have the right space to put it in, you know, and all that. And the fact that this is much smaller means it should be caught on quite well. So just moving on to the concept of this album. So again, this is another big change for you conceptually.
on the press release for the album, it describes it as being an exploration of the way that the human brain has evolved in the internet era. So when I read that, I was pretty intrigued by it. So how did you sort of like go about writing the lyrics this time around compared to your last album, which obviously To the Bone revolved around the idea of sort of like fake news and this kind of post-truth sort of society that we kind of find ourselves in now. So is there some of that DNA still present in the Future Bites, or is it looking at a sort of different side of things?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the world that I wrote To the Bone in it seems like a different planet now compared to the world we live in right now. So I would say the genesis of this album, The Future Bites, was about 2 years ago. I was on holiday with my now wife, and I got chatting to a guy in the bar of the hotel we were staying at. He was actually one of the co-owners of the hotel, and I was talking to him, and I said, "Well, is this what you do? You run this hotel?" He said, "Actually, no, this is what my wife does. I have another job." And I was like, "Well, what's your job?" And he explained to me what his job was, and it was I forget exactly what he told me, but it was something like his job was to analyze why people put things in their Amazon shopping basket or any shopping basket on any, internet commerce site, but didn't follow through with the checkout. So we do that all the time. We all do that, don't we? I'm always putting things in my Amazon and my eBay basket, but then never checking out. And then one day I'll just think, oh, I don't want that, and I'll take it out. So his whole job was to analyze the data. Millions and millions and millions of items have been put in Amazon shopping baskets or eBay shopping baskets every day, but not actually being purchased. So his job was to analyze that data and find ways then to persuade people to go that last step, to cross the Rubicon, if you like, and actually pay their money and make the order. Because these companies, of course, it's worth billions and billions of pounds to them every year, people putting stuff in there. And I thought to myself, of course that's a job. Of course that's a job in 2019 or whenever it was. That must be a job, because that's, and as I began to think more about it, I'm thinking to myself, okay, these are the people that kind of control our lives now. It used to be that politicians controlled our lives. Not anymore. It's the people who basically are creating the algorithms that are making us buy things, watch things, and listen to things online. These are the people that control our lives. Now, obviously, we're all kind of complicit in this. We all go along with it, and we all love it. And I don't want people to think I don't want people to think this is some massive sort of old man, shouting at the clouds. Because the first single, for example, Personal Shopper, that's a love letter to consumerism. I'm not complaining about it. I love it. I love the fact that, because some of the things mentioned in some of the things Elton mentions in the middle of the song, like 180 gram vinyl reissues and deluxe edition box sets. Of course, I love that stuff, So to me, it's almost like a love letter to consumerism. And I think that's part of the thing here, that we're so busy. So many of us are so busy consuming and following the breadcrumbs that these people that write these algorithms have created online, that we're actually not aware that there's something very insidious going on behind the scenes. And I think the album became kind of exploration of, of that kind of aspect of modern life, if that makes sense.
I think a lot of people misunderstood Personal Shopper then, because I think a lot of people online just saw it as, you sort of attacking sort of like consumerism and it being sort of like a very negative stance on it, whereas in reality it's the opposite.
I think it's a really fun song.
It is.
I mean, in fact, I got Elton John, the world's most famous living consumer.
So how did that all come about?
So I mean, he had he thought it was a great idea, and it's okay. How that came about? Well, I had the song, and this kind of love letter to consumerism, if you like. But I mean, it's not as simple as that, because obviously there is an edge, there is a darker edge to it too. I don't want to say it's it's just this big happy, isn't consumerism great? Of course, there is a dark edge to it, and all those lines about buy the shit you never knew you needed, and all the shit you've bought before, and all that stuff. Which again, I do as much as everyone, So there is that kind of side to it too. But at the same time, I love consuming, and I think most people love consuming, and Elton certainly loves consuming. So I had the song, and I wanted that section in the middle to be somebody reading a shopping list of what I call first world consumer items. So not the things that we need, but the things that we like to buy.
Yeah.
So we don't need most of those. We don't need branded water. We don't need Fit Club membership. We don't need deluxe edition box sets. But in a way, they're the things that make us happy. You know, they're the things.
What's behind you?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. The things that make me happy. They're the things that kind of, in a way, define us as people. The things we choose to collect, the things we choose to consume and purchase, are in a way the things that define us as people and tell other people a lot about us. One of the things I'm fascinated by is how there's a generation now that their whole life exists in a cloud. There is no physical manifestation to what they choose to listen to, watch, because they don't own anything, you know. Their movies, their music, their photos, they're all in a cloud. So if you go around to that person's house, you know, that's what I love. When I go to somebody's house, I love to look at their book collection or their movie collection or their record collection. I can tell so much about them even before I've really conversed with them. And I love that, you know, I love that side of consumerism. The things I choose to buy, in a way, is 50% of my personality. So anyway, I wanted this list of what I call first world consumer items. And I wanted someone recognizable. You know, I was thinking of another singer or an actor or something. And I didn't really have an idea who until me and Rota, my wife, we went to see Rocket Man. And if you've seen that movie, you'll know at the end of that movie, there's a little play out section at the end of the movie. And it said Elton has now kicked all of his addictions except one. And there's a picture of him with all these shopping. There's a picture of him with all his shopping. And there's this light bulb went above my head. He's the most, of course, he's the most famous consumer on earth. Everyone knows Elton John loves to shop. And I just thought, this is too perfect not to happen. So I knew someone that had previously worked for Elton, and I sent it to him and I said, can you get this to Elton? Because I think he'll really love it. But I didn't think the possibilities were that high, you know. But then the next day I got an email back from him and he said, Elton's calling you in 10 minutes. I shat myself. Oh my God. Anyway, so sure enough, 10 minutes later, my phone rings and it says, there's a call coming in from Antibes in the south of France. That can only be one person. Anyway, so basically he just, I fucking love this. This is perfect for me. And he was so enthusiastic about it. And of course it was, you know, as a concept, it was made for him. And he kind of knew that and acknowledged that. And we worked a little bit on the list because there were certain things he wouldn't, like he didn't want to say anything about mobile phones because he says, I've never fucking owned a mobile phone. I hate them. You know? So he wouldn't do personalized number plate. So there were certain things he had personal objections to, but he came up with some other suggestions. So that, you know, that was absolutely thrilling for me, being such a massive Elton John fan as well.
Yeah, just amazing. So just moving on to the album's artwork, because again, this is something that's very different.
Yes.
It compared to, you mean, your other albums, which have kind of always had quite sort of intricate, detailed artwork. This is, you know, very, very minimal in its approach. It's got a lot more in common with, say, the design of like Apple compared to you know, sort of some sort of artistic, you know, painting or something. So I've got the Eminence Lee single behind me here. So I'll just bring that up to camera actually, so people can see it,
because I've not seen it.
Because you haven't got a copy yet, have you, Stephen?
I haven't seen it yet. No.
So this is the Eminence Lee's single that came out on Saturday. So that's the front, and there's the back. So so it's, I mean, it's a paint tin. So so just I guess just explain to me just how did you approach the artwork sort of this time? And obviously you've got a different designer in this time. So do you want to just tell me about how that started, how that collaboration process started, and what you were sort of, I guess, trying to achieve with this artistic direction?
So we started talking about, you know, the kind of origins of the project, coming from talking to this guy that basically worked for Amazon and those kind of companies. And there's one really interesting thing about you know, well, there's lots of interesting things about the modern world of consumerism, but there's one thing that fascinates me, perhaps more than anything else, which is this whole concept of logo placement and designer products, high concept designer products. So the idea that you can take a t-shirt worth $1, and if Supreme put their logo on it, they can suddenly sell it for $300.
Yeah.
You can take a cheap pair of trainers, and again, you can put the Supreme logo. Sorry to pick on them because they're not the only people doing it, but they're certainly the most
they're the most notorious company that do that, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah. And not only that they were doing it, but the fact that people actually were buying into it.
Yeah.
And so you reach a point where you get someone like Virgil Abloh, who can basically market a brick with a serial number on it and sell it for £250, a limited edition numbered brick, and it sells out in a second because it's a Virgil Abloh product. And this whole thing fascinates me, the idea of packaging, branding, and consumer, and when it's kind of connected with consumerism. And to me, it goes back to, you know, that whole concept of Marcel Duchamp putting in a urinal in an art gallery. And the moment, so it's the idea that actually what gives an object its worth, its value, is sometimes nothing to do with the object at all. It's to do with everything around the object, the marketing, the kudos, the demographic, the audience, the amount of money those people have, and the exclusivity that an item is perceived to have. So I was starting to think a lot about that. And obviously I've always done, you know, deluxe editions of all my albums. And I thought this time we're just going to do a deluxe edition, and the only words on the front cover, and this was my starting point. The only words on the front cover are going to be limited edition, deluxe edition. Originally I wanted overpriced limited edition. I was dissuaded from that. But, you know, there was lots of different ways we could go, you know, take the gag further. And I also remember when I was growing up, Public Image Limited they released an album which just had the word album on the front, and the CD version just had the words compact disc. And there's something I love about the minimalism of that. You know, I've always loved minimal art anyway. But the idea that it doesn't matter what the picture is, it doesn't matter what the product is. The fact is, what matters is it's a Future Bytes product.
Yeah.
And the more ludicrous the product and the more overpriced it is, the more people covet it.
Yeah.
So here we have a paint pot, which has no other information on it, but it simply has a Future Bytes. So, and then we get into, you know, yeah. And I love that. So we kind of ran with that, and we had a lot of fun with that concept, and it extends right through the packaging, you know, and it's a very high concept package. In the deluxe edition, we have a warranty document, which is one of the most surreal, ludicrous warranty documents you will ever read if you take the time to read it. There's a customer feedback questionnaire. There are various, you know, diagrams. So it's a parody of the corporate world of modern design aesthetics. And I hope people will feel like they're in on the joke, because it's supposed to be fun. And to me, it's also something that I think is very much, again, going back to the idea of the music, it's very much of the now. Very much of the now.
Yeah. Because these companies, I mean, like Supreme, I mean, they're just so shameless about the way in which they go about this. Just put a logo on it, you know. It can be the cheapest T-shirt ever, you know. But there's this like cult of people nowadays, particularly young people, that will queue up outside these shops and they'll go and spend like 250 quid on a T-shirt. It's crazy. It really is.
Crazy. It is crazy, and you know, and it is a big part of the music world as well, because we now, I mean, one of the other things I've noticed over the last 2 or 3 years since To the Bone came out is now the market for deluxe edition box sets of legacy albums has just gone through the roof.
Yeah.
I mean, there was always things like that coming out, but the last couple of years, it's just gone ballistic. It's like every week there's 10 more box set editions marketed, you know, coming out and being promoted, which is great because it's keeping me in a lot of work, because I'm involved in some of these projects. But I'm just wondering now if we've reached a point of saturation where there's only a limited number of people who buy all these box sets, and a lot of them, frankly, are just full of hot air. They are full of hot air. You know, you can tell that the record company have sat down and said, "Oh, it's the 50th anniversary or the 40th anniversary of such and such an album. Let's do a box set." Long before they've actually looked to see if they have the content to justify doing a box set. And I've always tried to be very conscious of that with my box sets, to give a lot of content. This is no exception. I mean, in the deluxe edition box set, there's a lot of really exclusive stuff. 6 songs only in the box set, remixes only in the box set, demos only in the box set, and the packaging obviously is again very elaborate. And there's a lot of gags in the package, which we, as you know, because you've seen them, we can't actually show them in advance.
No.
We don't want to spoil the surprise. But when you take the lid off the box, for example, you're going to get a surprise that hopefully is going to make you laugh.
Something that wasn't in that trailer that we put out as well.
In the trailer,
we held back quite a lot of stuff from that trailer, so
because we don't want to spoil the
exactly
fun,
yeah,
you know, and so but it's that idea. But as you kind of alluded to, a lot of this now, it's got nothing to do with the utility of the product at all. In fact, sometimes the more useless the product, the more people want it, you know, as best exemplified by the Virgil Abloh brick, which is useful for nothing. You know. But the point is, it will probably keep its value. I mean, I think 50 quid or something. They're probably on eBay for like 10 times that already.
Yeah.
But this is a strange development in the human race and the human psyche. The fact that consumerism has now entered this new phase where it's almost like the object doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's the kudos of having it in your home or having it on yourself that's more important, or the design of the logo is more important than the way that the object is designed.
It comes back to, I mean, because I guess for young people, a lot of it is like being able to show off, or sort of flexing, as they call it now. You know, I mean, that's, you know, that's what it is. It's about, you know, them being able to show off to someone else. Is like, oh, I've got this, because it's like the fashionable thing, you know.
Of course it is.
But it's just got to a point where it's kind of, you know, absurd, you know, like it really is.
It's reaching surreal level. For me, it's like, I think you know, when I was a kid, the way you would kind of project your personality to the outside world is you'd have a T-shirt of the band you love, and you carry around the records of that band in the school playground. You know, hey, you know, I've got the new Gary Newman album or the new Jam album, whatever it was. And now I think, because, as I say, kids aren't necessarily buying physical product, I think it's more, as you say, about what brand of trainers they're wearing and that kind of. And I think for the older generation, it's more about what fancy box sets have you got on the shelf. You know, when your friends come round for dinner, oh, I've got the new Rolling Stones Goat's Head Suit box set. You know, still in its shrink wrap. Yeah, probably still will be 3 years from now when you come in the next time. But it doesn't matter. It's the fact that you've invested in that. It's almost like it's comforting for you, and it's also like a status symbol that you show to the world that you've invested your money in this artifact. And I think it's the same for all of these things now. It's the exclusivity. And of course, one of the big gags that we have not yet announced, which again, thank you. My wife's just brought me in some tea. Thank you, honey. One of the other big gags we've yet to play is the I guess the kind of zenith of that way of thinking, but we won't talk about that.
No, we'll keep that top secret for now. Or will be revealed shortly. So, just moving on. So I guess the album's promotion has kind of also had this kind of, I guess, a similar approach to what these brands would take to sort of market their own sort of things. It's very sort of blunt, in your face. This is what we're doing, and we don't really care about what you think, you know. So you can go and follow the Future Bites Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels, and you can sort of, you know, I guess become involved with that sort of world. So I guess just moving on to COVID, because you mentioned that the deluxe edition had 6 extra songs on it. So originally, when we announced the deluxe edition, it had less contents on. So that was one of the things that you did during lockdown, right? You added to the album.
Yeah, well, particularly to the deluxe edition. Well, actually, the album itself changed. I
Yeah,
replaced the final track with something completely different to what had originally been there. I wanted a more beautiful, kind of haunting way to end the record. So a new track called Count of Unease came in and replaced the final track on the record, which will now come out as a standalone single later on, I think. But I also went back to the deluxe edition and just kept adding content to it. So we've ended up now with six exclusive songs. And by the way, I mean, you know, there are other songs from the sessions that are also, I mean, the songs on the B-side of Em and the Sleaze are again exclusive to that format. There's a lot of, so Eyewitness and Floral Green are both exclusive to that. So there was, you know, I would say probably in the whole project, there's something like 30 songs that have been created and written and recorded. So the 6 that are on the deluxe edition are completely exclusive to that. There's a bunch of really extended versions of some of the album tracks, because I think you've heard the album, so you know the album is quite succinct, isn't it? For me,
it is. Yeah, it's focused. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I remember reading comments when the album got announced. People saw 40 minutes and they thought, right, that's not an album. It needs to be at least 50 or 60 minutes. That's too short. But for me, 40 minutes is like the perfect length. It's like after about 45 minutes, you know, you sort of attention span sort of goes. I think that is kind of the perfect album length. You know, it's something that's focused. You look at all the classic albums, you know, I mean, Dark Side of the Moon, you know, is like 40 minutes, isn't it? You know, and
many albums I love are less than 30 minutes, you know. Nick Drake's 26 minutes, Notorious Brothers, I think, is like 30 minutes. There's many examples of classic albums that are 30 to 40 minutes, and actually I would say the majority of the accepted classic albums are around the 40-minute mark. And this is another thing I think I became very much aware of last 2 or 3 years. I wanted to make a record which people got to the end of and they weren't exhausted. That actually they just wanted to go back and put the record on again and listen to it again, because it seems like no time had passed. And I think you're absolutely right. 40 to 45 minutes for me is the optimum time for people to be able to concentrate on a record. After that, it just becomes music by the yard. And I speak to someone who's abused this my whole career, you know. Most of my albums have been at least 50 minutes. And this time I mean, I could so easily have made this record another 60-minute record. And I remember having a discussion with my A&R guy, Michael Rowe, just before Christmas last year. I think we were at an Underworld show together, and I just sent him the final running order I'd come up with the album. And I said, "What, are you happy with it?" And he said, it was 11 tracks at that point. It was 55 minutes. And he said, "I think it's a really great 11-track album. And I think it's a brilliant 9-track album." And what he meant by that, too long. It was exhausting. That even though every song in itself kind of had merits, you know, put them all together and it just became fatiguing. And I think particularly in the world we live in, we've got so many distractions now. If anything, you know, album listening experiences should be getting shorter, not longer. So I'm really proud of the fact that I stick to my guns with this. It is an album I think you get to the end straight away, you just want to listen to it again. That's what people are hearing it are telling me. But it meant that there's been a lot of other material available for the deluxe edition, the B-sides to the singles. So I'm happy that, you know, about that decision.
So just going back to Eminent Sleaze that came out this weekend, because obviously people have been listening to it. So In Floral Green is a cover of a Lonely Robot song, isn't it? So how did that come about?
Well, John Mitchell, who is Lonely Robot, is a very good buddy of mine, a lovely chap, incredibly talented, and he made that song and he sent me the record. And I mean, there's no great story to this. I just loved the song. And I just thought to myself, this is something I could definitely hear myself singing this. It felt like it was part of my. It felt like it was almost my song. You know what I mean? I don't mean that in a way like he's copied me. Quite the opposite, you know. But copy my style or anything like that. It was definitely a Lonely Robot song. But I heard that and I said, to me, that sounds exactly like, you know, something I could do. And it was also an incredibly beautiful song, very affecting song about something that we're both, you know, very interested in. And I said to him, can you just send me your. So in a way, it's not even a cover version. It's almost like his because a lot of it is his recording.
Yeah.
I've reworked and remixed, and I've added my own parts to it. But it's his original backing track. I said to him, John, do you mind if I just borrow your backing track? I want to sing this song. I love this song.
Yeah.
I want to do my version of it. And I added a few things. I changed the guitar solo, I changed the drums a bit, I added some extra guitar parts. But basically, a lot of it is from his original backing track, which was so good to start with.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think my instincts were right, because a lot of people listened to it, and it was almost like, well, that was made for you to sing, including John. You know, he said, "Oh God, your voice suits it so well." You know, and I always instinctively I kind of thought that originally. It's just a stunning song. And you know, and again, I'm happy if people discover some of what John does through hearing my version.
Yeah. He puts out quality music. He really does.
Yeah, remarkably gifted guy. Yeah.
Yeah, much in demand producer as well.
Yeah, also. Yeah.
So just go back to it again. So Eminent Sleaze. So this is obviously the second single from the Future Bites. It was accompanied by quite a sort of dystopian set in the future music video. That obviously it does very much tap into the whole the Future Bites sort of concept and the whole idea behind that. It's definitely divided people. The song. Which is that something that you expected to happen?
I never know what to expect. I guess I'm always aware that I'm kind of pushing my audience around quite a lot, you know, in terms of expectations and what I do, because to me, let's cut to the chase here. The one thing I think that fans usually will want, at least in the sort of immediate future, is they want something the same as what they already like, you know. I'm not talking about everyone. There's some people that, you know, but people generally, they walk through a door into your world, and that's a magical moment for them. That the moment they walk through a door into your world, and it could be this album or that album, that's the door they walk through. That's what makes them fall in love with what you do. And essentially what they're trying to do from that point on, a lot of people, is recapture that moment when they first discovered your music. And when that doesn't happen, when the artist has kind of changed direction or something, then that can, I understand that can lead to disappointment, sometimes anger, you know. I mean, I've got there's plenty of that directed at me too. But I like to think that if a song is initially divisive, then I've done the right thing. Then I've done something right. Because the one thing I would hate is for people to just be listening to it and complacently thinking, oh yeah, that sounds like, you know, Stephen Wilson. That sounds like what he does. And I don't want that, because I never wanted that from the artists that I really grew up loving. You know, the people I really admire, not just musicians, but also filmmakers. I mean, take a filmmaker like Stanley Kubrick, never, apart from a couple of war movies, never made a film in the same genre twice, you know. And that's something that's less prevalent in the music world. I think bands or artists tend to try and find a niche or a successful formula, and then they kind of endlessly try and cater for their audience by recycling that. But to me, those artists, I would usually lose interest in them. It was the people like David Bowie or that would hold my attention, or Frank Zappa that would hold my attention, because I never knew what I was going to get when I buy their new record. Or Kate Bush or Peter Gabriel, never knew what they were going to do next. Prince, you know, I remember hearing the first single from Sign of the Times, the title track, which was nothing like what I was expecting, but I completely, you know, was won over by it. More so, I think that if it had just been something like I already liked, you know, more of what I already liked, because it gave me a much deeper admiration for him as an artist, that he was willing to confront the expectations of the audience and risk losing, you know, some of his existing.
Yeah, because I mean, when you make the decision to do this, to, you know, change tact with what you're doing musically, I mean, surely you must have that fear that, like, oh, you know, people might not like this and they might abandon me, and you know, it takes some doing to say to yourself, right, I'm doing this. This is what I'm doing, and if they like it, they like it. If they don't like it, well, tough.
And it sounds very arrogant, and you know, by the way, it's very arrogant. But I think that's part for me, part of being an artist is that arrogance to say,
Yeah.
I'm kind of doing this for me. I'm not really doing this for you. But
Yeah.
but therein lies the great paradox of being a professional musician, is that you do have to make a living. But this is a tightrope I think you walk, and that's what's so incredible about the career of David Bowie, is that he was constantly changing, and yet he was constantly managing to take his audience with him. And I think that's a very, very difficult trick to pull off, to be able to create your own universe. Frank Zappa, another great example, someone who created their own universe. It's almost like they created their own genre. Because that the eclecticism in that guy's catalogue is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
From serious avant-garde classical music to dumb albums of doo-wop covers, and everything in between. I mean, that's just
Yeah.
and in a way, it's harder to get away with that than ever before. I mean, in the 2020, the world has become so homogenized. The sound of popular music has become so homogenized, and people's attention spans are so diminished. Actually, it's willfully foolish to take that kind of approach.
Yeah.
But I can't do anything else, because really, it's all about, feeling a sense of momentum, feeling a sense that I'm creating my own musical world. And I sometimes feel like if people are upset that I haven't done what they wanted them to, it's because they have an idea of me as a generic musician. And I have tried so hard to, particularly over the last couple of records, tried so hard to get away from this idea that I'm a generic artist, that I belong to a genre, and actually to do that Prince thing, to do that Bowie thing, albeit in my own, my own level, which is much far below them, but I'm not comparing myself to them, but in my own way, to create my own universe, so that the people who listen to what I do and like what I do are expecting, in a way, sometimes to be perhaps disappointed the first time they hear a song, new record. It's not what they wanted, it's not what they expected, but they might give me the benefit of the doubt and go with it and grow to like it.
I do find it funny though, because I know that you don't read any of your comments, but I read a lot of them, as is my job. But so a lot of people seem to have already been kind of just assuming that this album is going to be, that they're just not going to like it, which is, I just find that fascinating, how they hear one song and they just think, right, okay, the album is going to be like that, and that's not what I like. Therefore, I'm going to go and write a comment and say that it's not, it's a bad album. It's rubbish. I think this album in particular, I think the two songs that have come out so far, it's not representative of what the whole breadth of this album is. There's a lot there to unpack, and I think when people do get that final album, they'll realise that just where you were. I guess what you were trying to sort of accomplish with this, really.
I hope so.
Yeah.
And if they don't, then that's okay too.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, listen, I want to get away from this idea. I think sometimes, and I don't read these comments, but I know from experience that sometimes people, because they don't like something, it's like I've done something wrong. I didn't give you what you wanted, so I done. I haven't done anything wrong. It's just one of those things, and people may not. Eminent Sleaze is probably quite a controversial, quite a divisive single to choose, because it's very funky. It's got a very, very kind of blue. It's almost got the gospel singing on it.
Yeah.
Again, that's quite atypical for the rest of the record, and every song has its own musical personality. As a whole, I think it works as a real musical journey. Like, the one thing that is very consistent throughout my career is every album is constructed like a musical journey, so that even if you don't like the individual constituent parts of it all the time, I think the overall flow of it and the overall feeling of it is very powerful. And I think that's no less true of The Future Bites. I remember when the first single Hand Cannot Raise is without doubt my most popular record.
Yeah.
It seems to be the most popular. I remember when the first single came out on that, it was Perfect Life, which is an almost purely electronic song. And I was still reading the occasional comment at that point. And I remember reading almost like, oh, this just sounds like an interlude. That's not a proper piece of music. And of course, I'm sure when they heard it in the context of the record, it by the way, it's probably my favorite song on the record, but it's beautiful. Yeah. But I think those things perhaps sometimes make more sense when you hear them in the
Yeah.
It's one of the unfortunate things about the world of music. You have to release previews. It's like
Yeah.
releasing a scene from a movie out of
Yeah.
context and expecting people to understand the story from a
Exactly.
2-minute scene taken
Yeah.
edited out the middle of a movie, this epic movie. And so it's very hard to get that across in individual songs like that. But it's been something that's happened with almost every album. I remember people being upset with Pariah, people being upset with the first song of this record, the first song of that record.
Yeah.
And then when they hear the album, I guess for a lot of them, it hopefully starts to connect.
So I guess what's different with this album, and obviously it was the same with To the Bone as well, is that this isn't a sort of concept album in the sense that it's not like a story from beginning to end like Hand Cannot Erase was. It's more sort of like individual sort of songs, right? And I guess
yeah.
And like I said,
Hand Cannot Erase is really the only album I've ever made that had a narrative aspect to it.
That's true, actually. Yeah.
Everything else has been themed, in the sense there's a theme that kind of runs through the songs, but there isn't that sense of narrative. At least there is in the music, but not literally.
Yeah.
I think Hand Cannot Erase was really an exception in that sense. But sorry,
just because you had just such a crazy concept for that album. It's just fascinating, wasn't it?
That story was just a gift. Yeah, I mean, and I could never have contrived to have found a story like that. It just presented itself to me, and it just was perfect for telling that story through music. But things like that have rarely come along in my career. So most of the other records tend to be more theme songs that kind of group into themes, and this is no exception in that sense.
Yeah. So just going back to sort of like I guess what you've been sort of doing, because obviously the pandemic has meant that you can't tour anywhere.
No.
So I guess aside from adding those additional sort of songs to the deluxe edition, what other projects have you been working on?
So I've like a lot of people, particularly self-employed people, I've had a kind of enforced time at home, which is great. I mean, I love being at home, and it's something that I've not done for many years. What I mean by that is there's been very, very rarely times over the last 20, 25 years when I've had more than 3 or 4 months at home before I've been off somewhere again. And this time I've had I think about 18 months so far, pretty much at home. And since the lockdowns kicked in, of course, barely even leaving the home. And luckily for me, I work from home anyway, and I have my studio. In fact, my new studio build was completed just around the time that lockdown started. So, yes, I mean, again, expanding the deluxe edition, creating a lot of content. So, as you know, because you've been involved, we've been creating a lot of video content to go with the device because I can't tour it. So, the great video, for Eminent Sleaze, the video for Personal Shopper, which is going to come out soon as well. Working on other video content. And what else have I been doing? I've been, doing a lot of the remix work for these classic album projects, and which I kind of wound down to an extent before I found myself in this situation. But now I had all this time. So at the beginning of lockdown, I sort of sent out emails to all the record labels and all the artists and management. And I said, look, I'm stuck at home. Send me stuff to remix. So I've done a lot of remixing this year. In Atmos as well as stereo, and some projects just stereo, some projects stereo 5.1, some projects Atmos. So I've done a lot of stuff in a lot of other genres that I've not really worked in before, which has been fun, but I am a fan of. And of course, the other thing I've done is started the podcast with Tim, the Outdoors podcast, which has been a lot of fun. Which has just been an extension of how we always are when we get together anyway. We just nerd out, off about music that we love, and that's been fun because we've focused on. I think our remit for that was we're not going to talk about the classic albums. We're fed up with hearing about the classic albums. We don't need. There's nothing more to say about Sgt. Pepper. There is nothing more to say about the Stone Roses or Nevermind or Dark Side of the Moon or whatever it is, insert classic album here. There's nothing more to say about those albums.
You're trying to find the more sort of like overlooked albums from history that people just haven't paid too much attention to.
Yeah, right. because I'm a great believer that a lot of the classic albums, in a sense, people have become lazy over the years, so they're told that they're classic albums, so they only go and listen to those. So they become self-perpetuating. Those are the only albums they've heard. It's like Miles Davis' Kind of Blue. It's a great jazz album, but for a lot of people, it is the only jazz album they own because they've been told it's the archetype. So therefore, that when they're asked what their favorite jazz album is, they say Kind of Blue, and so that it perpetuates itself. That becomes the classic preeminent jazz album. And of course there are many wonderful jazz records. So I think that's been our kind of remit there, is to try and pick on albums that we genuinely believe are A-list, or sometimes we pick on albums that we don't even think are very good, but we think they're interesting, a subject matter, or an album that I love, that Tim loves, that the other doesn't, and how do you defend that? So I'm the one with the big mouth. So I usually steamroller over his opinions, but he's pretty good at articulating what's special about albums he loves to do. So that was a big thing at the beginning.
I've just got a question about that, because I know that you said that, like, I guess you and Tim both agreed that, like, the sort of classic album period, it sort of is very much within the sort of 20th century. Because there hasn't been an episode of the album years where you've been in the 21st century. It's all been pre sort of like 99. So is there any chance that you'll do an album years podcast focusing on a year in the 21st century, or is that not possible?
No, I mean actually since we started the podcast, we thought we could do. I think initially we thought it was going to be like 5 episodes and it was going to die a horrible death, and we'd never than that anyway. But I think, because it's doing quite well, I think we could do that. Our kind of way of thinking was that the golden age of the album was that kind of period of 50 or 40 years or so from the mid 60s to the end of the 21st century, because that was the era before streaming began to erode the notion of the album as a listening continuum, if that makes sense. So yes, of course there are still great albums being made. Most of them in the CD age are too long, as we discussed before. But interesting, I do see a trend back to the sort of 35 to 40 minute albums. I think I'm not the only person thinking in this way. So that's been interesting to see that trend coming back of getting albums down to quality, not quantity, not music by the yard. When you buy an album, you're not buying it by the yard. You're buying it for the quality of the emotional response you'll get from it. So anyway, leaving aside that, I don't want to rattle on any more about that. I'm sure people are getting tired of it. About that. But yes, so this idea that I think we could sort of talk about some albums also from the 21st century, because no doubt there are some classic albums in the last
but I've noticed nowadays with some artists that I listen to, is they're sort of embracing this kind of new way of releasing music now, which is very much in line with the sort of Spotify sort of way of going about things, which is they're releasing songs as like pairs and not releasing albums, and they'll just do that, and apparently that is something that because people have got less and less attention spans now, they'll listen to those songs more. So releasing an album in the sense that you sort of spread everything out, that's becoming a popular thing to do now. Which it's almost as if but in a way, I really hope that. Go on.
I was going to say that in a way, isn't
album,
Yeah. I'm sorry, Rob. I think we had a glitch there, so you've got a bit behind me. We got a bit of But what I was going to say was, isn't that in a way? We were just talking about this thing about Personal Shopper came out in March, Eminent Sleaze came out last month, King Ghost is coming out next week. So in a way, that is the model that we're adopting, that we all have to adopt. If it was up to me, honestly, I wouldn't release anything in advance of the album. I would just release the future bites. And so people could hear this musical journey and not sort of say, to themselves, well, I'm not sure about that song, so maybe I'm not, because it to me, it doesn't really, I think it's something to do with the kind of music I make. It doesn't really work to me to sort of pick bits out. As I say, it is like taking a scene from the middle of a movie and presenting it as a commercial for your movie. It doesn't quite work for me, but unfortunately, it's the model that we kind of we do all have to adopt, and it's it's this idea of building momentum.
Yeah, I do think though that just for a laugh, you should just in the future just release an album just like that, and just see how it goes. You know, just like an experiment. I think it'd be fun.
Maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll do
Yeah,
that. Yeah, maybe I'll do that. I mean, yeah, I mean, part of me, as I say, would love to do that, but I'm also not
yeah,
naive, and I know that you have to build.
yeah,
And we talked about this. One of the interesting things about, you say Sleaze was quite divisive.
yeah,
Um, Sometimes something being divisive creates a buzz,
yeah,
because people are talking and arguing about it. So even that in its own way creates momentum and creates profile. So even though I don't particularly like the idea of taking a song out of context of the record and potentially, risking people not quite understanding it, I think even that has created dialogue and created momentum, which hopefully will lead to the album having some kind of fanfare when it comes out, because that's really what it's all about. It's creating
exactly.
momentum, because I want people to listen to the album. I'm old-fashioned. I still love the notion
Yeah,
of the album as a musical journey.
yeah,
I don't think it works taking things out of context.
yeah,
Even though I do have some songs, it's funny. The songs that for me have really become the evergreens that I've written over the years are the songs that all the hardcore fans complained about when they originally it's, songs like Lazarus,
yeah,
too simple, it's too pop. What's he doing? And it's become, and songs like Permeating and Pariah, and the songs that everyone complained about are the ones that ultimately do become the most streamed, the most listened to. I think
yeah,
because they do cut across genres and people who like different kinds of music, and they're not just listened to by the fans. And I like the idea that particularly with this record, I think this album does, if it gets the right opportunity, it does have a chance to
yeah.
perhaps reach, some new people. I mean, I say that, but I say that about every record I ever make. This is
Well, what we were talking about earlier, just I guess with an approach to songwriting where you want to create these kind of memorable moments and hooks. Lazarus, Pariah, I mean, these songs have those hooks in, and there are songs on the Future Bites that also share that as well. So yeah, I don't see why any of these songs on the Future Bites couldn't, become as popular as those songs. But yeah, it's just sort of interesting how that sort of pans out and which songs, I guess, become more popular than others. But speaking of Lazarus, one of your other projects this year was And No Birds Sing, which is the Deadwing movie that's been in development for, it seems like ages now, right? And it seems to be finally coming to fruition, which is wonderful.
Well, I hope so. But I mean, obviously, COVID has put a big sort of, full stop, or at least a comma in the middle of that sentence too.
Okay.
So, yes, I mean, that just to give a little bit more context here. So that script was originally written in 2004 for one of my best friends, Mike Benyon, to direct as his first feature film. Mike was someone I was working a lot with. I was doing music for commercials at the time just to keep myself afloat financially. I was doing a lot of music for commercials, and I met Mike in the commercial industry in around that time, and we wrote the movie for him to make. We could never get it off the ground because at the time the technology was still quite expensive to make movies. You still had to have proper film crews and that stuff. And now I think 20 years later, or I should say a couple of years ago when we revived the project, it was really because it occurred to us that now you can shoot a movie on a couple of iPhones,
Yeah.
And so the possibilities to make the movie are perhaps a little bit more open than they would have been 15 years ago. So we started and we shot the 4-minute test sequence, which was a lot of fun. We deliberately chose a sequence with no dialogue because we were working with not people that weren't necessarily actors. So we chose a section that we could really just show off the kind of visual vocabulary and the sound design elements that we plan to use. And I'm very excited about it. I think it came out great. I mean, it's still, just a germ of what we hope it can be. But yes, it's kind of morphed into something, quite different to what the Deadwing script was originally. But the characters are still there. David, who gets name checked in Lazarus, is still the primary character. And of course, the songs I originally wrote for Deadwing have come out over the years on various albums. and there's still a few that have never come out. So yeah, that's another thing I kind of got involved. That was kind of before lockdown, and there's also a book project as well. You know, I've started a lot of other things during lockdown that I probably would never have got around to. Things I've always wanted to do, but I mean, I'm sure everyone says this, don't they? You know, they've finally started on things they always meant to do, but never could find the time to get around to. And now you have all the time in the world for these things. So that's fun.
Yeah, brilliant. So, just going to talk about the next single, which is King Ghost. So, this is very exciting. So, we've put some, I guess, a little teaser video out that shows the video. Which, I mean, let's start with the video first, because this is the video was created by Jess Cope, who, for people who don't know, she also created the videos for The Raven That Refused to Sing, Drive Home, Routine. So, she's done, you know, a lot of fantastic video work for you. So, how did you sort of like approach sort of this video with her? Like, did you want her to completely change up and do something different with this time, or did you just sort of let her just come to you and decide what she wanted to do?
Well, she wanted to. I mean, I think that's something we have in common, myself and Jess, is that she also doesn't like to repeat herself.
Yeah.
And you know, if you look at a video like People Who Eat Darkness, for example, and compare it to Routine, I mean, the style is so different, but actually they're both Jess Cope videos. You'd never guess if you just showed those two videos, particularly those two. I think People Who Eat Darkness and Raven. If you showed them to the same person, they would never believe it was the same animator in both director in both cases, and it is. And this time around, Jess wanted to do something completely different again. I basically sent her the record, and she fell in love with King Ghost and said. She said it's the favorite song of mine you've ever done. I have to do this video. And I think at the time we had an idea to do something live action. But when she came back and said she was so enthusiastic about that song, I said, okay, this has got to be for Jess then. So, and then she came back with the idea for the video, which is very different for her. It's her sort of palette has always been quite melancholic and quite somber. This is incredibly vibrant and incredibly colorful. And in a way, to me, that's kind of analogous with the record, the album. When you listen to Future Bites compared to, say, some of my other records, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like it feels much more vibrant and much more colorful, much more catchy, and fun, if that's not the wrong word, in connection with one of my records. There's still lots of miserable stuff on it too, don't worry, folks. But it, you know, and I think that her video kind of reflected that too. It is more vibrant, and it's got less of that narrative thing too. It's not trying to tell a story like some of the other videos. It's more about just trying to create a mood. And I think we're also conscious, you know, we're again living in the age of YouTube. People don't watch videos to the end anyway.
Yeah.
They just don't watch them, and it's so sad. But like a lot of the people that have probably seen Routine and Drive Home and Raven have not got to the end anyway, because they're being bombarded with the algorithm that says people who watch this also. I'm the same. I'm guilty of it too. I go and watch something on YouTube that I've chosen to watch, and within 20 seconds of it starting to play, I'm already checking out. Oh, what else can I watch? Oh, I click on that. And we all do it, and so this is the world we live in now.
Particularly for Routine, a video like that. I mean, you'd watch that and you'd think it would be, you know, just really depressing. But then at the end, there's that like really uplifting moment, isn't it? Where like, you know, she sort of moves on from it, you know. And to think people have just probably skimmed through and just not watched that part is just crazy. Yeah. So
the stats are always disappointing, aren't they? When you look at that. 90% of the audience watch the first 2 minutes, and it's very sad, you know. But anyway, this is the reality, which all comes back, you know, in a way to the themes of the record again. Yeah.
So just going to the track King Ghost. So when I first heard this track, I mean, I believe it was the first track you ever sent me from this record, like way back, and immediately it was like, right, okay, this is the. I was thinking this is the electronic album, because this song is very, very electronic in its approach, and your vocals are, you know, processed to the point where it's almost like, you know, it sounds like somebody else singing, which is quite remarkable, I think. So, was there something that you wanted to achieve with this record? Because it's obviously quite a short piece, but it has just a really, really nice sort of flow and build up to it. And I guess, did you want it to be sort of like this purely electronic sort of showpiece for the album? I guess because that's kind of what it is, I think.
Yeah, I don't know if I was. I don't say I was. I don't think it's necessarily conscious of it. Oh, this is going to be electronic, and again, I mean, I might be wrong, but I think if you listen to it in the context of the record, I mean, you heard it out of context. If you listen to the context of the record, I don't think it would immediately leap out of you. Sorry, let me say that again. I don't think it would immediately leap out at you as being, oh, this is the electronic track on the album. It feels to me very organic, very natural, very beautiful.
Yeah.
In some ways, it's more like a classical Stephen Wilson song than the first two singles are. It's very
melancholic.
Yeah. It's very beautiful. It feels very emotional. And that line, you know, King Ghost, hold me like I was your only memory. I mean, that's so I think very haunting in the context of the song. And it's all made because it came from the fact that the song started off by me playing around with arpeggiators on analog keyboards. Yeah. And again, it wasn't a conscious thing, but when I brought it into David, we just started exploring all these analog keyboards, and it just got more and more beautiful and more kind of luminous and haunting. And I just never felt the need to pick up the guitar. So again, it wasn't a self-conscious thing, but yes, it is. I mean, what I love about it is it's almost entirely electronic. There's a little bit of percussion from Jason from The Cure plays on it, and Michael from Everything play on it. But they're just doing some percussion really. Most of the drums are again very electronic, but it feels so human and so organic and so emotional. And I think that's the beauty when electronic music does that to you. It's a very special thing, and people know that I love electronic music. It's one of my favorite forms of music, really. And I guess it's something I've never really. I mean, again, you know, we talked about that Perfect Life being the first single off Hand. That was almost a purely electronic track. But again, you hear it in the context of the record, it doesn't necessarily leap out as being electronic. But yes, I mean, we had a lot of fun. All I'll say is on this record, we had a lot of fun with analog synthesizers and keyboards.
There definitely seems to be a focus for this record instead of it being so guitar based. Because there was a lot of guitar tracks onto the bone. So I guess this time we're just like, right, we'll just see what we can do with some keyboards. And obviously, I mean, looking at those studio photos, I mean, it just looked like you had so many different types of keyboards to play around with. And in the video that you put on your new TikTok account, you know, showing off your keyboards there in your studio.
I've definitely invested in a lot of keyboards over the last few years. I mean, listen, I got nothing against guitars, but I got to the point where I would sit with a guitar on my knee and I didn't know what else I could do. You know, it's like I've done everything with this thing. I've done everything with this instrument. I've made 25 years. I've been making records that basically are based around this thing in my hand. I don't know what else to do. I've tried alternate tunings. And I found myself gravitating towards the massive possibilities that keyboard present. Not only analog, but also digital keyboards and plugins, computer plugins. I mean, you talked about the manipulation of the voice on King Ghost. That's all to do with the manipulations, processing that's possible with, you know, modern plugin technology. And you hear it all over modern pop music. You know, it's one of the hallmarks. And by the way, my record is not a homage to modern pop music. But there are things about this record that will sound more, you know, like some of the things that people are doing in contemporary pop. Some of the voice manipulation stuff like that.
Well, I remember you told me that one of your favourite tracks was Billie Eilish, "Bury a Friend," right?
Amazing.
And that's and that's a perfect example of sort of vocal modulation in pop music, but done in a very sort of clever and creative way.
Some of my favorite music over the last, I would say, 10 years. Well, let me rephrase it. Most of my favorite music over the last 10 years, hardly any of it has been rock music. And I've just found myself really being impressed by, not by albums so much, but certain songs that I've heard that are very electronic. I'm just looking on my phone now.
What have you been listening to recently? This is interesting.
Well, I'm just having a look now. So let's have a look. Recently added. I mean, I'm a big fan, as you know, of the sort of the new classical artists like Max Richter, Nils Fromm, Johan Johansson. And the interesting thing about those guys, they don't use guitars hardly at all. What they do is they're kind of creating music in the tradition of classical music, but they are guys that have grown up listening to Aphex Twin, Autechre, Massive Attack, and Boards of Canada and Radiohead, and that all comes into their sound too. And I love that idea. The sort of the modern classical composer would be someone just as familiar with electronic music as they would be with what a violin can do or what an oboe can do. So I love a lot of that stuff. I love the new Max Richter album, Voices. So beautiful, that record.
I've not checked that out yet. I will listen to that. Yeah, I did see that come up.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. I really love it. But other than that, I mean, people actually, I don't even want to. Some people will be horrified at some of the things that I like. I listen to, but sometimes I listen to them because I'm trying to get, some ideas, some production ideas. Not because I want to make a record that sounds like that, but there are some amazing production gags on some of these modern records.
Yeah.
The Billie Eilish single, Bury a Friend. I mean, the production is just amazing. And what I love about it is it's so sparse.
Yeah.
There's hardly anything going on, just a very elaborate sort of painterly kind of approach to creating the backing track. And her voice is completely at the forefront. And it's, in some ways, it's everything.
Yeah.
The quality of the voice is everything. And she's got this wonderful voice that feels like it's whispering in your ear. And I love that,
Yeah.
I mean, and David, my producer, was playing me some stuff as well. He played me this incredible song by Azalea Banks called 212, which is like 10 years old now.
Yeah.
But again, I was blown away with the production and the sound of it, So I'm finding perhaps that I'm naturally a little bit less interested in guitars anyway.
Yeah.
Because I'm not hearing records that are exciting me, that have got guitars on. And I don't think
there's not a lot of that nowadays. Yeah, like I've got to be honest. Yeah. Yeah, it does seem.
I'm not the only one. I think there's a sort of the one beautiful thing about rock music is it's always very good at reinventing itself, but it's taken a long time this time.
It has.
It seems to me the last really exciting movement in rock music was like maybe grunge or Britpop in the mid-90s.
Yeah.
Guitar music. And since then, nothing really, maybe the post-Radiohead bands like Muse and Coldplay, but really since then, I would say probably in the 21st century, there hasn't been anything. And listen, I know there's people out there that are going to be screaming, what about this band? What about that band? But I know there are interesting bands out there, but none of them have really taken their place in the mainstream.
No.
Which tells you something. Yeah.
It does tell you something. Yeah. There's none of these bands that are sort of making really sort of crazy new rock music that are playing stadiums, and doing stuff like that. There's not many, So it's
because I think to an extent the possibilities of rock music have been explored to the nth degree now, and it's really, like I say, it's really hard when you sit with the guitar on your knee now to do anything that hasn't been done a trillion times before.
Yeah,
and
it's like. Yeah. Nowadays, I mean, there's more music being made than at any other point in history, So to be able to stand out in that crowd and do something that's unique, that's why it's so difficult for up-and-coming bands to get anywhere, because they have to be so unique that they stand out, amongst so many different people, So it's, and
I think we have to acknowledge it. We have to acknowledge here that the modern contemporary music is supposed to kind of mirror the age that we live in. Yeah. We do live in the electronic era. We live in the era of electronic music, electronic sound, the internet, all of these things. We live in this era of the electronic world. So I think, in a sense, that's why the music that kind of comes from that world is the music that's kind of proliferating. And rock music, which is in a way about an older technology. Is really struggling a bit to have its voice in the 21st century.
Yeah.
And what doesn't help is when the audience that wants that kind of music is quite conservative. And, and they're not prepared to go into any other sort of area.
Yeah.
And I'm aware of that, and I guess in a way I'm caught in the cusp of that. I saw that happen to Radiohead when they went from OK Computer to Kid A. You know, they went from this very sort of stadium rock, bombastic guitar sound to this much more kind of arch electronic sound, and lost 80% of their audience overnight. But what they did get was a lot of respect, I think, and they got a long-term, you know, status as people that are prepared, you know. And again, they're another band that I really admire for their fearlessness in confronting, you know, expectations and remaining relevant, you know.
Yeah, and every album they do, I mean, it's going to be something different, isn't it? So
absolutely, and I don't like all of them. I don't like everything they do, but sometimes something they do will just still completely hit me, like the track on the last Tom York album, Dawn Chorus. Just so powerful and affecting and so beautiful. And again, it's just him and some very minimal piano and electronic backing, and he's almost just talking over the top of it. Again, you know, thinking out of the box, and sometimes the fans can be the biggest enemy to artists doing that. And again, I don't want to feel like I'm complaining or having a go at the fans. I completely understand. I get it. But at the same time, I like to think that they will respect my right to not listen to what they're saying, in a way, you know, in the nicest possible way. I can't listen to that. And they have the right to not follow me anymore and to not listen to the records. But I can't be taking that into consideration when I'm doing what I'm doing, what I need to do, you know.
Yeah. So we've been going now for about an hour and 20 minutes, so I just thought I'd wrap up. Just to remind people, Emmensley's single, so this came out, this is the Record Store Day vinyl, so there are still copies of this lurking about in record stores, so you know, phone up your local and see if they've got one. But if you don't have a record player, then there is a CD as well that you can go to Burning Shed and pick up. And also look for the new single King Ghost coming very soon, actually, isn't it? A couple of days away. I probably shouldn't give that away.
Is it the 30th? I think it's a Friday, isn't it? This Friday.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. All right then. Thanks so much, everyone, for sort of hanging with us, and we'll do one of these very soon.
Thank you very much. Thanks, guys. Thanks for watching. If you've been watching.
Thank you. Bye now.